Excellent. Excellent.
All right, speaking of Tom Corrigan, let's go over to Tom. He's got a very big, important event, and his title, of course, other than the other couple of hats he wears one as acting president of the Irish American Archive Society. He's a great boxing fan, a great sports fan, and he loves to talk about one of his favorite subjects is Johnny Kilbane, the great Johnny Kilbane. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Jerry. It's great to be here.
I've been trying to capture you to get you in here for the longest time.
Well, you've had a schedule and I've had a schedule. I'm just back from China, so.
I know about that picture you showed us of the Great Wall.
Yeah, it can be green there when there's no pollution, just so you know.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Is there a lot of pollution there?
Oh, Beijing and Shanghai, about four times the pollution.
Let's get back to what you love to talk about, which is Johnny Kilbane.
Well, it's been a great subject for me pretty much since the library got together with the Irish American Archive Society in anticipation of the centennial of Johnny Kilbane's great championship start in 1912. So lucky for us, one of the great-grandchildren of Johnny found in the grandmother's attic, the O'Toole's, some old film, and with the help of some of the people the library knew and some people from the Irish American Archive Society, we were able to restore most of the last 8 rounds of that championship fight in 1912. And of course, a lot of people don't know that Johnny was the longest serving boxing champ in any of the 8 weight classifications. He was featherweight champ from 1912 to 1923. Fought over 140 fights, lost only 4 times. The first time he fought for the championship against Abe Attell was his one loss. He lost a couple exhibitions against guys twice his weight during the years he was champ. And then he lost his title fight to Cricky in 1923. So 140 fights. I like to tell the story that Johnny Kilbane was so faithful to his wife that when he got knocked out the one time, he promised that if he got knocked out again, or knocked to the ground again bad, that he wouldn't fight anymore if she didn't want him to. So after he beat Abe Attell, he was champ, and he never got knocked down again until he lost to Cricky, and true to his word to his wife, he never fought again.
And that was in 1923, was
1923, yes. And he was just an amazing person in terms of what he did for boxing in Cleveland, what he did for the Irish American community, and one of the reasons he became something of a symbol of achievement. We don't remember, but boxing was so big as a sport, not just for the Irish, but for the Poles. And my favorite statistic is, guess how many professional Jewish boxers there were between 1910 and 1940? 3,000.
Really?
In fact, a majority of the title holders in that period were Jewish boxers.
Was Schmeling Jewish?
Jewish? No, Schmeling's the guy that got beat.
Yeah,
he got beat by American Jewish boxer, and then got beat again by Joe Louis. Okay. So it was the famous.
And he was German, right?
He was German.
Yeah,
He was Hitler's
Max
guy.
Schmeling,
Yes,
right?
Max Schmeling. But my favorite quote of Johnny's, the night, imagine the presence of a young man. He was, the night before his championship fight, they talked about how much he was into it. He really wanted to go in and kill the guy and everything. He had a sports writer in Los Angeles talking to him, and he says, no, that's not my reason for boxing. Show me a business where I can make more money than I can make in the ring, and I will never fight again. I don't fight because I like it. I fight because it means a living for my family and myself. And that's what boxing was. It was a way out of the ghetto for not just Irish Americans, but for any numbers of Americans. And people forget how big a sport it was. If you put together baseball, football, and basketball together today, that's how big boxing was in the early part of the 20th century. Baseball cards, no, boxing cards were the dominant. Sports endorsements, not basketball players or football players. Boxers got the big endorsement deals. The first $1 million sports contract, John L. Sullivan's 200 city tour. The first $1 million gate for a sporting event, the Dempsey-Tunney fight. The first $1 million radio sports contract, the fights. The first $1 million TV sports contract, the Friday Night Fight show, if you remember that. And
we don't. Cutting does.
Right.
But so boxing was a pretty important thing to the culture. And one of the things that our celebrating the centennial did is it stirred the heart of not just Irish, but other Clevelanders who care about what a symbol Johnny was. And Councilman Matt Zone and Judge Ray Pianka, who care very much about the Gordon Square neighborhood and Irish town where Johnny, now called Kilbane town, where Johnny grew up, they basically said, well, why can't we do something permanent to recognize Johnny as a symbol of American Cleveland's immigrant struggle and immigrant achievement? And so the Irish American Archives Society got together with some early thinkers, and we decided, well, let's see if we can't build a really nice sculpture, get a garden going in Yolo there near Battery Park, literally within a few blocks of where Johnny grew up. And so that effort got started, and we were so successful at it that the Irish government actually helped fund a documentary called A Fighting Heart that was shown at the Cleveland International Film Festival the year after the centennial to great acclaim, and has been since shown throughout Ireland and on their networks, and actually will be shown, I guess, on Cleveland's PBS Idea Stream in the near future. But just as significantly, the people of Achill and Achill Beg got together and decided to build a memorial to Johnny with a small sculpture that actually sits on Achill Beg today, that they dedicated about a year after the centennial. And we got together and we've funded and now raised more than $250,000 in pledges to build a sculpture commemorating Johnny Kilbane here in Cleveland. So on September 28th, the same weekend as the great International Mayo Society meeting in Cleveland, on that Sunday we're going to dedicate Rowan Gillespie's Johnny Kilbane, A Fighting Heart sculpture. Mm-hmm. And it's lost wax, cast bronze. It's a wonderfully beautiful sculpture. Pictures the three ages of Johnny, which is a little like the three ages of us. Johnny as a boy, Johnny as the champion boxer, and Johnny as a statesman. Because after he was a boxer, Johnny was an active member of this community and was a state senator, a state representative, and died as the clerk of Cleveland Municipal Courts in 1957. So, and that's how I knew him. I was just a young Irish judge's son. Judge John V. Corrigan, my father, introduced me to Johnny when I was still 5 and 6 years old. And I remember him as a very distinctive guy. And the amazing thing about him, of course, too, was, imagine he made, for that fight, the equivalent of about $70,000. Within 2 days, he made as much doing a commercial for the movie theaters, and another $70,000 basically doing what prize fighters did then. They did little mini exhibitions and talks on the vaudeville circuit. So on his way home, Johnny made $70,000 with his family. He always took his wife and daughters with him to the fight. They never watched him fight, but he took them to camp and whenever he went on a tour. And they actually came back to Cleveland on St. Patrick's Day in 1912. And a lot of people attribute the size and grandeur of the St. Patrick's Day parade in Cleveland to the 200,000 people that showed up to meet Johnny on that March 17th.
But Tom, remember, they had it all over Facebook and Twitter.
Exactly.
Well, word of mouth then was pretty good.
Right?
Yeah, no.
No.
Particularly among the Irish, you
But
know.
wasn't that extraordinary, though, to be able to get that number of people out without these things that we have today, this technology we have today?
Right.
It tells you the amount of interest that was in Johnny Kilbane and boxing at the time.
No question about it. And of course, Johnny has the links all the way back. I mean, we talk about John L. Sullivan. John L. Sullivan was the great Boston Irish American who pretty much made American prize fighting. And he and his immediate successor, gentleman Jim Corbett, they're really the ones who legitimated boxing as a sport by ending the cheating, improving the reffing, adopting modifications on the rules of the British, the famous, I always get them wrong, the Marcus
of Queensberry.
Marcus of Queensberry. And they pretty much legitimated boxing as a sport. You know, it was banned in many states for a long time.
And we have an awful lot to talk about. But I do remember reading about when Kilrain fought John L. Sullivan for 79 rounds, and Sullivan won.
Right.
Isn't that right? And they had no gloves then, did they?
No, in those days
It
it
was
was before the
79
gloves.
rounds they fought.
And one of the things that those guys helped legitimate is bringing gloves in, because for a long time the old the traditionalists would not support clubs.
That's right.
But starting to define even rounds and ring times and those sort of things, it was really critical to the sport to have. You can name any sport. If you don't have rules and you don't have people who care about the standard of the sport, and Irish Americans led that effort. Boxing became an important sport in the 20th century largely because of what Irish Americans did. And the great link is Johnny was a young man, his mother died, his father went blind, he's working in the railway switch and going to his LaSalle club to improve his dancing because thinks he may make it on the stage. And
Yeah, he
Tom,
wanted to be in vaudeville.
right, and Tom Sharkey comes in and does an exhibition fight. Now this is the same Tom Sharkey who knocked off John L. Sullivan, one of the few guys to beat John L. Sullivan, and who lost didn't win the title from General Jim Corbett. That's who he fought for the title. Well, he came through Cleveland and put an exhibition on, and that's when Johnny got the boxing bug. And of course, you got to remember, boxing is a sport. It's not about slugging as much as it is about, the quality of your fight, the quality of your, almost as he said it, my Irish dancing did me really well in terms of training. And Johnny was an amazing. Now he could punch. A couple times he was accused of not being a very good hitter. So the next two fights he knocked the guys out.
And he didn't bite anybody's ear off.
No, he did not do that.
We're going to come back and talk with Tom about Johnny Kilbane, which is a big event coming up the 28th of September. In fact, this program is going to be live there, so I hope all of you guys will be there. And we'll chat a little bit more about Johnny Kilbane. But what I wanted to talk to Tom more about is this sculptor that's coming in. This is a world-renowned sculptor. I know Tom wants to mention him. He alone, he should be a huge attraction just because of his importance as a world-renowned sculptor.
There's no question about it. Rowan Gillespie, who's done the Johnny Kilbane sculpture for us that we will dedicate on September 28th at Battery Park, is probably as accomplished a sculptor in Europe as there is. He, to give you some idea of the works he's done, the Titanic Museum
In Belfast, which
in
we're going to be
Belfast,
visiting.
and that beautiful sculpture there. The when the famine was to be memorialized along the banks of the Liffey, a competition was held, and Rowan Gillespie's figures of the survivors and sufferers of the famine that are along the banks of the River Liffey, among the most visited sculptures in Ireland these days, along the River Liffey. A similar sculpture he did of migrants along the banks of the Lake Ontario in Toronto. Beautiful, beautiful piece of work. And then I like some of his more realistic things. There's a wonderful James Joyce sculpture that exists in two places. One is Regis University in the Jesuit College in Denver. The other is in Marion Square in Dublin of James Joyce, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful sculpture of him. And then, of course, Boston College commissioned Rowan Gillespie to do the 4 Irish Nobel laureates of Yeats, Haney, Shaw, and Beckett. So that's just wonderful. If you go to the Irish American Archives Society's website, you can see more details. We're at irisharchives.org, Irish Archives, all one word, .org, and there's a wonderful link to a video series there on how the sculpture, the lost wax, bronze method of sculpting, and it's just wonderfully instructive and also gives you a sense of the quality and grandeur of this piece of art that I think is going to become a tourist attraction for Cleveland.
I believe it will.
And
But Tom, one of the things I think we should mention in order to get this thing started, it's very difficult to put together a program like this and to fund it especially. And I think we should really thank Jack Cale for getting the ball rolling.
Well, I was going to mention that.
On the funding of this thing. And when we were all talking about it, how we're going to fund it, Jack stood up at the meeting. I was there. And he made the first commitment for $25,000.
Well, and he's done more than that. He won't let me talk about more, but he's just been wonderful. And the fact is that a sculpture of this quality just doesn't happen. And we want to do everything right. The installation, we want it to be permanently protected so that there's funds set aside to keep it preserved. we've promised the neighbors there in this new neighborhood in Battery Park about the quality and the upkeep of this. And then we want the ceremony itself as part of the great International Mayo Society weekend to include appropriate printed material about the history of Johnny Kilbane, about why he's an important symbol for all of us in Cleveland, particularly Irish Americans. But for all
Also,
of us.
Tom, that one of the things you're hoping is that all of the Irish organizations participate in making this a reality.
That's
And
true.
I think it's important for the clubs, the United Irish Societies. I think there's 26 or 28 clubs in the United Irish Societies, and it would be nice if we're all part of this great endeavor, because like you say, it's a historic thing that's going to happen here in Cleveland.
And of course, we're every contribution counts. So
Yeah.
any little bit that you can do to help the IrishArchives.org site can tell you how to do it, and we'd be glad to have your help, and just as glad to have you at the ceremony on the 28th of September.